Good evening. Welcome to the forum for candidates of House District 36A, which covers Champlin and the western part of Coon Rapids. This is a seat that was held by retiring Mark Uglum. Both candidates running in the general election were invited, but Bill Marish declined to participate. I am Karen Varian of the League of Women Voters, ABC, and I'm a resident of Blaine. This forum is co-sponsored tonight by the Anoka, Blaine, Coon Rapids Area League of Women Voters and Champlin Women of Today. The League of Women Voters works to promote the active and informed participation of citizens in the voting process by conducting candidate forums such as this and by promoting voter registration drives for all eligible voters. The League does not endorse, support, or oppose any political party or candidate, but we do study issues of local, state, and national importance. League is open to membership for men and women of all ages 16 and over, and we invite you to join us. You can visit our website, lwvabcmn.org, for more information. The Champlin Women of Today is a nonprofit volunteer organization which promotes service, growth, and fellowship. It is open to men and women 18 years of age or older and meets the third Tuesday of the month at 7 p.m. in the Parks and Recreation Building in Champlin. We will start tonight by asking 3 introductory questions. The responses will be timed of Women of Today member who will give the candidate a 15-second notice before time is up and then a stop sign at the end of 1 minute. Then we will take audience questions and end with a 1-minute closing statement. Since we only have one candidate here tonight, this should go pretty fast. Let's start with the 3 introductory questions that were given ahead of time. So I'd like to introduce you to Zack Stephenson, who is the candidate in House 36A. So the first question is, describe your background and community involvement.
Thank you very much for the question, and thank you for having me here tonight and for moderating, and thank you to everyone here for being here tonight. I very much appreciate the chance to talk to all of you. I am Zack Stephenson. I am a lifelong resident of the northern suburbs. In fact, I live 1 mile down the road from the house that I grew up in. I am the father of 2 beautiful young girls who are 5 and 3. In fact, if I'm a little flustered tonight, it's because I came from kindergarten open house right to here for my oldest daughter, and you can imagine that raises a lot of emotions in a person, saying their oldest kid off to kindergarten. I'm a Hennepin County prosecutor. That's my job. In terms of civic involvement, I'm on the Coon Rapids Planning Commission. I'm very involved also in my church, the First Congregational UCC in Anoka.
Thank you. Second question is, what are your qualifications and why are you seeking this office?
Well, in terms of qualifications, as I mentioned, I've lived in this area my whole life, so I understand it very well. I'm also a prosecutor, and that gives me great insight into public safety issues facing our community. In addition to that, I had the great honor of working for a brief period of time for U.S. Senator Amy Klobuchar. And I learned a lot working for Amy. I learned the importance of working hard. No one works harder than Amy Klobuchar. My goal is to work about 80% as hard as Amy Klobuchar. And I learned the importance of listening to all sides. That's something that Amy does extremely well. And I'm seeking this office because I have those 2 little girls. I'm really worried about the world they're growing up in. I want it to be as good for them as it's been for me, and I want all kids to have the opportunities in life that I've been blessed to have in my life.
Thank you. Question 3 is, what are your short and long-term goals for the future?
Well, you know, in the Minnesota House, we're going to be facing a really big issue right off the bat next session, which has to do, it's a boring phrase, but federal tax conformity has huge issues. At the end of the last session, the legislature got caught up in political gamesmanship, and they left off a very important piece of work. And if nothing is done very early in this session, millions of Minnesotans are going to have major trouble when it comes time for tax season. And so my big goal going into legislature will be making sure that they're held harmless and that we take care of federal tax conformity right off off the bat. In the long run, the problem that led to this, political gamesmanship, needs to end. People in Champlin and Coon Rapids are tired of the kinds of gamesmanship we're seeing, the bickering and the squabbling between the parties down at the legislature. They want people to work together for common sense solutions. And we have a long history in Minnesota of doing just that. We can look back as recently as the 1990s and see a Republican governor, Arnie Carlson, working with the Democratic legislature to achieve real results for Minnesotans. We can get back to that. That's what I want to be dedicated to.
Thanks. We'll now go to audience questions here. And the first question kind of relates to what you were talking about there. It's about the omnibus bills. Do you think they serve the citizens of Minnesota well? And if no, what will you do to see that more bills get to the floor?
So the question relates to omnibus bills, and for people who don't know, these are huge bills that get passed at the end of the session that wrap up a lot of little bills. And I'm very troubled by the increase in omnibus bills over the course of the last decade, because I think it creates opportunities for political gamesmanship and it decreases accountability in our politicians. And so we need to reverse the trend of moving towards omnibus bills. And the way you do that is with your vote as an individual legislature. When the legislature tries to run through a huge omnibus bill in the middle of the night at the end of the session, you vote no.
Thanks. Next question is, what is your position on ranked choice voting?
You know, it's an interesting issue. And actually, I generally favor ranked choice voting. I think that there's a lot of different systems that have been at play throughout the state of Minnesota in terms of ranked choice voting. And I think that we've seen different results in different areas. But in general, it's good to give people the opportunity to express themselves very clearly. I think it might be a way, in fact, to get away from some of that bickering and games playing that we've been seeing, the really polarized parties that have been making Washington-style politics sort of the norm in Minnesota. So I generally like the idea of ranked choice voting.
Thanks. Next question, and I have several questions related to this. This next one I'm going to try to kind of combine a little bit. It has to do with gun control in schools. Should teachers be armed to protect against a shooter in the school? If yes, what criteria should be used? And should we use available federal funds intended for schools to arm teachers in the classroom, and why?
Teachers should not be armed. There's a common sense at play here. Common sense tells us that guns do not belong in schools. And so as to the question of qualifications, I think that that's irrelevant. I think, look, I might be a little bit on edge about this right now because, as I mentioned, I just came from a kindergarten roundup, right? And you experience a lot of emotions when you're sending your kid to kindergarten. You don't expect one of those emotions to be fear. And there is something deeply wrong in our society when you're at a kindergarten event and you're looking at the doors and wondering if they're thick enough. If you're wondering if the school has a good plan for what to do in case the worst should happen. I think there's a lot of common sense things that we can do to try and decrease gun violence, and particularly gun violence in our schools. Number one amongst them is universal background checks on all gun sales in Minnesota. This is a no-brainer. We need to do more to make sure that violent criminals, domestic abusers, people who are legally prohibited from having guns should not have the opportunity to buy them.
The next question also relates to gun control, and I think you've already answered part of it, but it is a two-part question here. The first part is describe your stance on background checks and accessibility to guns. The second part is, should someone who has been convicted of a misdemeanor domestic abuse lose their right to own a gun?
I think that as to the first question, as I said a minute ago, universal background checks are a no-brainer. 90% of Minnesotans support it, 85% of gun owners. We look around the country, we see places that have adopted universal background checks have seen lower instances of gun violence. Domestic abuse is a huge problem in Minnesota, and one that we don't see nearly enough attention paid to it. I do think that people who have domestic abuse convictions need to have their access to firearms restricted.
Thank you. Since we've been talking a little bit about schools here, the next question is about schools. Do you support teaching the theory of evolution in schools or a more faith-based curriculum?
Well, I'm a big believer in science, and so yes, I think evolution should be taught in schools. You know, we are in a global economy now. We need to have world-class schools. We need to make sure that our kids are proficient in science and mathematics so that they can go out and have meaningful, rewarding careers. That's what's made Minnesota a great place to live, is our collective commitment to excellent education. That's why we have a great economy. We have to be realistic about the fact that, you know, businesses don't choose to locate here because of the weather. They're not here because of our taxes. They're here because of our people, because we have highly educated, highly skilled people. And that doesn't just happen. That's something we make happen year in and year out. And so we need to make sure that our students are getting the best education possible. And that means teaching science.
Thanks. Do you believe the marriage equality law should be repealed?
No.
Quick answer. This is going to go fast now. We get a lot of yes or no answers. But okay, the next question is, people with mental illness and substance abuse use disorder need safe, affordable, and stable housing in order to recover. Unfortunately, they are much more likely to experience housing instability or even homelessness. What are you going to do to address this housing gap in our mental health system?
What a phenomenal question.
This one came by email, so
yeah, well, and it's a great
Thanks.
one. I have to tell you, as a prosecutor, it's something that I see every day, the disastrous impact that untreated mental illness has on a person, how closely it relates to chemical dependency, because unfortunately a lot of people who have untreated mental illness self-medicate with drugs or alcohol, and that can have really disastrous consequences. We need to do so much better on so many fronts with regards to both mental health and drug addiction in our state. And housing really gets to the core of the issue, because we know that people who have stable housing are much more likely to get the medical attention they need. They're much more likely to take the medication they've been prescribed, which is often very key for mental health. They're much less likely to commit crimes. And so we know that when we provide people with housing, when we give them the opportunity to have that stable housing, we are preventing a lot of bad activity from occurring.
Thanks. As you can see, we have a variety of questions here. The next one has to do with how will you protect a woman's right to choose, especially in cases of rape and incest?
I am pro-choice. I think this is a really important issue right now, and one that's going to become increasingly important, because if you read the national newspapers, you will know that there's a strong likelihood that the Roe versus Wade decision will be severely constricted or even overturned in the next few years. And it's likely that Minnesota and many other states will have to make some serious decisions about how they're going to protect women's reproductive rights. And as I said, I'm pro-choice. I believe that women should have the ability to make their own decisions about their own health care, and I would be a strong advocate for that in the legislature.
Thanks. So if elected, what committees would you be interested in serving on, and why?
Oh man, that's a tough question, and I get asked it a lot, and I gotta be honest with you, I struggle with it because there's just so many that are really important to me. You know, I mentioned to you a minute ago that the most important issue facing Minnesotans right away is that tax issue. I really want to make sure our tax system treats middle-class families fairly. I think that we have gotten away from that in recent years as we've seen our property taxes go up as the state has sort of abdicated its responsibility to fund our schools, and so the tax committee is really appealing to me. I think education is just absolutely critical to Minnesota, and particularly to the northern suburbs. And so all of the education committees, early education, K-12 education, higher education, are really appealing to me. We really need to do a lot to reform our education system, particularly our higher education system. So those committees are very appealing to me. Oh boy, 15 more seconds to talk about like 12 more committees. I think that the energy committee is really going to be a key committee as we look forward to how are we going to work on climate change and a lot of the environmental issues that are facing our community, and I have to stop.
That is it for our audience questions. There are a few questions here I'm going to try to get in here.
Sure.
That are some general League of Women Voters questions.
Great.
One is, what is your position on disclosing of campaign contribution by corporations? What changes in campaign financing laws would you support?
You know, I talk to hundreds, if not thousands of people in the course of this campaign. I don't know anyone who's happy with our campaign finance system. It's a mess. It's a catastrophe. And as a prosecutor, I look at it through the lens of accountability and see that we have all of these mysterious donations, super PACs that no one knows where the money is coming from or what the agenda is. It's just a lack of transparency mess. So to the specific question of disclosure, I'm very much in favor of disclosure. I think that the public has the right to know how money is being spent to influence their democracy. And I think we need to go way beyond that in trying to take the money out of politics.
Thank you. And then this will be the last question. How would you reform the House rules to make the legislative process more open and transparent to the public?
That's another great question about how to make it more accountable. You know, we have great opportunity to watch our proceedings right now on public access television. I'm amazed at the amount of people when I'm out going from door to door who tell me that they watch the proceedings and they have specific thoughts about what's going on there. I think that if I was lucky enough to get elected, I would work really hard to be very transparent, very accessible and accountable to the community, because those are things that are very important to me as an individual, accessibility and accountability. It's why I've bothered many of you at your homes over the course of the last few months by knocking on your doors and talking to you, and I would work very hard to continue that if I got elected.
Thank you. Now it's your time to give your 1-minute closing statement.
Thank you very much. And I want to thank everyone again for being here tonight at the only debate we're going to have in Champlin in this race, or at least the only one that's been scheduled so far. Opportunities like this are really important in political campaigns because it gives candidates the chance to speak directly to voters, and it gives voters a chance to hold politicians accountable. And accountability is really important to me as a prosecutor. That's all I do every day, is hold people accountable for their actions. And so I think we need more accountability in our politics. I'm really frustrated by the fact that we see politicians who say they're going to do one thing and then do the exact opposite, who put all their work off until the very end of the session and pass huge bills that no one's read in the middle of the night. The solution to that is for people to hold their politicians accountable. And it starts at forums like this, and it continues on November 6th when you have the chance to hold all of the government accountable for the many ways that it's falling short right now. So thank you very much for your time, and I ask for your vote.
And thank you. This concludes our forum for tonight. I want to thank Zack Stephenson for his participation here tonight and remind you that his opponent is Bill Marsh. Thank you also to our audience for listening and for coming up with such great questions. Thank you, QCTV, for recording the forum and making it available to the public. I want to remind you to be sure to vote on Tuesday, November 6th by absentee ballot or in person anytime after September 21st at City Hall. You can visit our website at lwvabcmn.org or mnvotes.org for election information. Thank you again, and good night.